People think getting fired is the end of the world. For me, being tossed out of the office was not a defeat. It was the moment I smiled and handed my arrogant new boss the detonator to his own career. Entirely legally, the most ruthless revenge is not screaming or breaking things, but doing absolutely nothing and letting the system work. Sit back and listen to how one missing digital signature blew up a multi-million-dollar empire. Hello to the wonderful audience of the Boss Revenge Stories channel. I want to sincerely thank you for being here, but unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining our Patreon, where you can hear even better, exclusive true stories with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube, which you can access by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the Patreon link in the description or pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's story and meet our main character, Emery Scott. At 34 years old, I had spent over a decade meticulously building an airtight career in federal compliance. I was the biomaterials compliance supervisor at Ethos Biologics, a massive, rising medical technology conglomerate based in the beating heart of Chicago. My job was far from glamorous, but it was the invisible shield that kept the federal government from permanently shutting our doors. That shield remained completely intact until Vance Sterling took over as the new chief executive officer. Vance was the quintessential tech bro playing dress-up in a bespoke Italian suit. He came from a background of consumer app development, possessing zero actual experience in high-risk medical technology. To him, biological compliance was not a crucial safety net, it was just another software bug to patch, a frustrating lag in his grand vision of corporate efficiency. On a gloomy Thursday afternoon, he called me into his expansive, glass-walled corner office on the 40th floor. I walked in with my usual composed demeanor, holding my encrypted digital tablet, completely unaware that he had already decided to end my tenure. He did not even have the basic professional courtesy to offer me a seat. He just leaned back in his plush leather executive chair, steepling his fingers with an air of unearned, sickening superiority. "Emery, let us cut to the chase," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ethos is moving into a new era of aggressive digitalization. We need to be agile. We need to move fast and break things. And frankly, your role as biomaterials compliance supervisor is an outdated roadblock." I stood there, perfectly still, letting his ridiculous startup buzzwords wash over me. I did not blink, nor did my pulse quicken. "Compliance with the Food and Drug Administration is not a roadblock. Vance, it is a strict legal mandate," I replied evenly. He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively in the air as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "It is a massive budget drain. We are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on manual oversight when a proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm could do it in half the time. I am restructuring the entire department, effective immediately. Your position is eliminated. Security will escort you out of the building in exactly 15 minutes. He paused, clearly waiting for a reaction. Men like Vance Sterling feed on the panic and desperation of others. He fully expected tears. He expected me to beg for my livelihood, or perhaps yell, lose my temper, and threaten a massive wrongful termination lawsuit. It makes them feel incredibly powerful to hold someone's life in their hands. Instead, I felt a profound, chilling sense of absolute calm settle over my mind. A true professional does not throw a tantrum when insulted by an amateur. A true professional simply follows the standard operating protocol. "Understood," I replied, my voice as flat and smooth as polished marble. "If my position is officially eliminated, we need to finalize the regulatory handover protocol right now." I tapped the screen of my tablet, bringing up the standard offboarding document I had drafted months ago for worst-case scenarios. I placed the sleek device on his massive mahogany desk and slid it deliberately toward him. "This is a formal release of duty. It clearly states the immediate termination of all federal security clearances and responsibilities associated with my biometric profile. I need your signature to authorize the transfer of federal liability back to the executive board. Vance rolled his eyes, visibly annoyed by my bureaucratic insistence. He did not bother to read a single line of the dense, highly specific legal text glowing on the screen. He just grabbed his digital stylus and hastily scribbled his signature at the bottom of the form. In his dangerously arrogant mind, he was simply taking out the trash, effortlessly clearing away a bulky, expensive obstacle on his path to corporate glory. He handed the tablet back with a victorious smirk. "Good luck out there, Emery. Try not to let the modern world leave you behind," he sneered. "Thank you, Vance. Good luck with the digitalization," I said, retrieving my tablet and locking the screen. The document was encrypted. The timestamp was permanently recorded. The legal liability was now officially his. I walked out of his office, my posture impeccably straight. I returned to my desk, calmly placed my personal items into a small cardboard box, and walked toward the main elevators. The human resources representative was waiting there, looking incredibly nervous and uncomfortable. Without breaking my stride, I unclipped my corporate identification badge from my lapel and dropped it right into the trash can next to her desk. It landed with a satisfying, hollow thud. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the shocked murmurs of my former colleagues, a faint smile finally touched my lips. I walked out of the towering glass building and into the crisp Chicago air, the sharp, decisive clicks of my heels against the pavement echoing like a steady victory march. Vance Sterling thought he had won. He genuinely believed he had outsmarted the system to save a fraction of the operating budget, but I knew exactly what that arrogant fool did not. My biometric digital signature was not just a simple company login credential. It was directly and permanently hardwired into the Federal Chemical Safety Monitoring System of the Food and Drug Administration. That specific system requires continuous, authorized human oversight. It does not understand corporate restructuring. It does not care about artificial intelligence algorithms, and most importantly, it shows absolutely no mercy to anyone who violates its protocols. That Friday evening, the moment I stepped into my quiet apartment in the Chicago suburbs, I completely severed all ties to the corporate world. I took my company-issued smartphone, powered it down, and shoved it into the darkest corner of my junk drawer. For the first time in over 10 years, I did not set a morning alarm. I spent the entirety of Saturday at a luxury spa downtown, letting the hot stones and eucalyptus steam melt away the residual stress of working under an absolute amateur. I drank overpriced matcha lattes, read a thick fiction novel, and meticulously watered my collection of rare orchids. The silence of my weekend was absolute, profound, and deeply satisfying. It was the calm before a very specific, carefully calculated storm. Meanwhile, back at the gleaming steel and glass tower of Aetheris Biologics, the atmosphere was sharply different. Vance Sterling was busy throwing himself a catered victory party in the main executive break room to celebrate what he proudly called his aggressive human resources optimization. He was popping expensive champagne and boasting loudly to the junior board members about the hundreds of thousands of dollars he had supposedly saved the company in a single afternoon. To handle the aftermath of my sudden departure, he did not hire a seasoned compliance officer or consult outside legal counsel. Instead, he unceremoniously dumped the entire network of supervisory permissions onto Julian, a 22-year-old junior information technology technician who had barely been with the company for 6 months. Julian was a nervous, overworked kid who knew exactly how to troubleshoot frozen laptops and reset router passwords. But he possessed absolutely zero knowledge on how to navigate the draconian labyrinth of federal biotechnology regulations. Deep within the climate-controlled server rooms of the building, a silent, invisible mechanism began to turn. The Central Biological Materials Tracking System, which was legally tethered directly to the servers of the Food and Drug Administration, realized that my active biometric presence had vanished from the local network. By late Friday night, the main server started kicking back Level 1 warning emails to the administrator dashboard. The subject line was highlighted in a bright, unforgiving yellow. It read, Missing periodic biometric authentication for primary legal liaison. Initiate protocol immediately. Early Saturday afternoon, while I was enjoying a deep tissue massage, Julian noticed the rapidly piling alerts, sweating slightly and pacing around his cramped cubicle. He printed out the error logs and nervously approached Vance, who was in his spacious office preparing a flashy slide deck for his massive Wall Street investor pitch scheduled for Monday. "Mr. Sterling, excuse me," Julian stammered, tightly gripping the stack of papers. "The main repository server is throwing a bunch of weird errors. It keeps asking for a biometric override, and it is generating these automated warning emails every single hour." Vance sighed heavily, rolling his eyes as if Julian had just tracked thick mud onto his pristine carpet. He snatched the papers, barely glancing at the complex strings of code and federal mandate warnings, before tossing them straight into the silver recycling bin next to his desk. "Relax, Julian," Vance said smoothly, taking a slow sip of his sparkling water. "It is just a ghost in the machine, a leftover glitch from the outdated, clunky software architecture that Emery used to justify her inflated salary. She probably wrote a messy script that is just endlessly looping." "But sir, the warnings specifically mention a federal database ping," Julian pressed, his voice trembling slightly as he pointed at the bin. "Should I try to contact her and ask for the bypass key? We might need her retinas." "Absolutely not," Vance snapped, his fragile ego immediately flaring up. "I just fired that woman for being an obsolete roadblock, and I am not going to call her back begging for tech support. Mute the notifications. Turn off the alert window entirely. We will have the engineering team rewrite her whole codebase next month. Right now, I need you focused on making sure the projection systems and the network are flawless for the big pitch." "Yes, sir. Muting the alerts right now," Julian mumbled, scurrying back to his desk to blindly silence the very alarm designed to save their entire operation. On Sunday evening, as the sun began to cast long golden shadows over the Chicago skyline, I sat on my balcony with a glass of rich red wine. I opened my personal, highly encrypted laptop and accessed a secure government portal that tracked federal compliance statuses for registered biotechnology firms. I did not need to hack into my former employer's network. The government's own transparent tracking system told me everything I needed to know. I typed in my credentials and brought up the compliance dashboard for Etherius Biologics. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Right there, glowing starkly against the dark background of the screen, was a beautifully unforgiving automated audit timer. The 72-hour countdown had been triggered the exact moment I was removed from the active personnel registry on Thursday afternoon. The digital clock was relentlessly ticking down, second by second, minute by minute, completely undetected in the dark. The federal law governing our inventory was incredibly simple, yet devastatingly rigid. Without the physical scan of my retinas to authorize the continued storage and handling of volatile biological materials, the federal system would assume the facility had been compromised. If my biometric authentication was not registered by exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning, the countdown would hit 0. At that precise second, the system would execute a hard digital quarantine. The entire multi-million-dollar repository of medical materials would automatically lock down. No one goes in, no one goes out, and absolutely nothing gets sold or accessed. And the best part was that Vance Sterling, in all his arrogant wisdom, had manually ordered the only person who noticed the ticking bomb to simply turn off the screen. Monday morning arrived with the heavy, electric tension that only a massive Wall Street funding round could bring. This was not just a regular meeting, this was the most critical presentation in the brief history of the company, designed to secure over $200 million in fresh venture capital. The executive floor was buzzing with a frenetic, high-stakes energy. Junior executives paced the hallways in tailored suits, adjusting their silk ties and whispering anxiously into their earpieces. Premium catering staff quietly arranged silver platters of artisanal pastries and freshly brewed Colombian coffee on long mahogany tables outside the grand conference room. Inside, representatives from 3 of the most ruthless investment funds in New York were already taking their seats. casually reviewing their digital portfolios. They were hungry for a profitable acquisition, and Vance Sterling was determined to serve them a masterpiece of corporate illusion. Through the official federal deposition and Julian's sworn testimony that surfaced much later, I know exactly how the chaos unfolded. Down in the Network Operations Center, a very different reality was taking shape. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the 72-hour federal grace period officially expired. The transition was not subtle. It did not happen with a quiet email or a gentle pop-up notification. It was a brutal, instantaneous digital guillotine. Across the entire corporate campus, every single monitor connected to the central biological materials tracking system went violently black for a fraction of a second, before flashing back to life in a blinding, aggressive shade of crimson. A stark, unyielding message burned across the center of hundreds of screens in bold white letters. It read, "Monitoring protocol violation. State-level lockdown protocol activated." Simultaneously, the physical security relays kicked in. Deep within the sublevels of the building, the massive titanium doors securing the medical inventory vault slammed shut with a deafening metallic crash, automatically throwing heavy deadbolts into place. The electronic card readers next to the vault doors turned from a welcoming blue to a hostile, flashing red. The entire biological repository was now under strict federal quarantine. In his cramped cubicle, Julian stared at his control dashboard in absolute horror. The young technician frantically typed strings of diagnostic commands, his fingers trembling violently against the mechanical keyboard. Every command he inputted was instantly rejected by the system. He tried to override the lockdown using the master administrative credentials he had been given on Friday, but the federal software treated his login like a hostile foreign intrusion. A new window popped up on his screen, demanding the immediate input of a recognized, federally registered biometric signature to halt the quarantine sequence. Julian pulled up the active personnel registry to find anyone, who held the proper clearance. He scrolled through the entire executive roster. The reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow to the chest. No one in the entire company had the legal authority to open those doors. Not the chief financial officer, not the head of research and development, and certainly not the chief executive officer. The only name that possessed the required federal clearance was mine, and my name had been thoroughly purged from the employee database 3 days prior. Panic, raw and unfiltered, seized the young technician. He sprinted out of the server room, his heart hammering against his ribs, and burst into the executive suite without knocking. Vance was standing in front of a full-length mirror, practicing his charismatic smile and adjusting the cuffs of his imported shirt. "Mr. Sterling, we have a catastrophic emergency." Julian gasped, fighting for air as he leaned against the heavy wooden doorframe. The entire biological repository just went into a hard federal lockdown. The system flagged a critical compliance violation. Everything is frozen. Vance spun around, his practiced smile instantly dissolving into an ugly scowl. "What are you talking about? Fix it. I have the most important presentation of my life starting in exactly 20 minutes. The investors are going to want a physical tour of the lab facilities right after the pitch. Just use my administrative access and unlock the doors." "I cannot do that, sir," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Your administrative access is strictly corporate. This is a federal quarantine. The software requires a registered biometric signature from a licensed compliance officer. The only person who has that authority is Emery Scott, and she is no longer an employee." For a fleeting second, the color completely drained from Vance's face. The arrogant veneer cracked, revealing the terrified amateur underneath. He realized that his brilliant cost-saving maneuver had just locked him out of his own multi-million-dollar inventory. But men like Vance do not admit fault. They deflect, and they demand impossible solutions. Vance lunged for his sleek desk phone, his perfectly manicured fingers shaking as he furiously dialed my personal cell phone number. He paced behind his desk like a caged animal, the phone pressed hard against his ear. From the quiet comfort of a local artisanal coffee shop miles away, I watched my new phone light up with an incoming call from his private office line. I did not answer. I simply let it ring, taking a slow, thoroughly enjoyable sip of my vanilla latte. Back in his office, Vance listened in mounting rage as the call clicked over to my freshly updated voicemail greeting. You have reached Emery Scott. I am currently unavailable. Please note that I am no longer affiliated with Etheris Biologics and have officially transitioned to an independent advisory role with their primary competitor, Apex Medical Solutions. If you require private consulting services, please leave a message and my representation will contact you regarding my hourly retainer fees. Have a productive day. Vance slammed the phone down onto the receiver with enough force to crack the plastic casing. He was completely trapped. The proper legal course of action at this exact moment was painful but necessary. He should have immediately contacted the regional office of the Food and Drug Administration, reported the administrative oversight, requested a temporary emergency extension, and formally apologized to the investors waiting down the hall, informing them that the facility tour would have to be rescheduled due to a compliance audit. It would have been embarrassing, and it would have severely damaged his reputation as a visionary leader, but it would have kept him out of prison. But Vance Sterling possessed an ego far too fragile to admit a mistake of that magnitude to a room full of Wall Street sharks. He could not stand the thought of looking incompetent. The thought of losing the $250 million investment over what he still considered a minor bureaucratic technicality pushed him over the edge of rational thought. He made a devastatingly poor decision. He turned to Julian, his eyes wild and desperate. You are an information technology expert. Hack into the firewall. Bypass the federal lock. Are you insane? Julian recoiled, instinctively taking a step back toward the hallway. That is the federal government. Mr. Sterling, if we tamper with the source code of a mandated compliance lock, that is a massive felony. We cannot just hack our way through this. Listen to me very carefully, you little coward, Vance hissed, crossing the room and towering over the trembling young man. There are billionaires sitting in that conference room right now. If we do not secure this funding, this entire company goes bankrupt, and you will be out on the street with a ruined resume. I am not asking you to permanently disable the system. I am ordering you to go into the code, find Emery's deleted signature file, and forge a temporary authentication token. Just force the system to recognize her signature so the doors open for the tour. We will figure out the rest tomorrow. That is digital identity theft, sir. That is wire fraud, Julian whispered, tears welling in his eyes. It is a temporary corporate workaround, Vance barked, pointing a furious finger at the door. Do it right now, or I will make sure you never work in the technology sector for the rest of your natural life. Get to your keyboard and forge the signature. Intimidated, terrified, and lacking the professional backbone to stand up to a tyrant, Julian slowly nodded. He turned and walked back to his terminal, entirely unaware that he was about to pull the trigger on a weapon I had carefully loaded and aimed weeks ago. Julian's fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, slick with cold sweat. He completely bypassed the standard user interface, diving straight into the root command terminal of the local network. He extracted a cached, fragmented shadow of my biometric signature hash from a deeply buried archival folder. It was a sloppy, desperate, and highly unstable piece of coding, but it served the immediate, terrifying purpose. He injected the phantom credential directly into the authentication portal of the federal locking mechanism, effectively forcing the system to believe that I was physically standing in the server room, staring into the retinal scanner. For a breathless, agonizing moment, the terminal completely froze. Then, the blinding crimson warnings that had plagued the monitors vanished in an instant. The harsh red indicator lights on the massive server racks blinked out, replaced by a smooth, comforting, and entirely deceptive green. Deep within the sublevels, the heavy titanium deadbolts securing the medical vaults disengaged with a loud, mechanical clunk. Vance let out a loud, triumphant bark of laughter. Clapping his hands together, the sheer, overwhelming relief washed over his face, instantly hardening back into his signature mask of impenetrable arrogance. He reached up, expertly adjusting the knot of his imported silk tie, his chest puffing out with renewed, entirely unearned confidence. He looked down at the trembling junior technician, not with gratitude, but with the smug, condescending satisfaction of a master who had just whipped a disobedient animal into submission. He turned sharply on his heel and strode out of the Network Operations Center, ready to conquer the boardroom, completely and utterly oblivious to the invisible digital snare that had just snapped shut tightly around his ankle. What Julian and Vance fundamentally failed to comprehend was the architecture of modern, high-stakes cybersecurity, specifically a beautifully vindictive concept known as a honeypot. I had anticipated Vance's catastrophic lack of ethics over a month ago, right around the time he first started making veiled, passive-aggressive threats about restructuring my department to cut operating costs. I knew with absolute certainty that a man who viewed strict federal compliance as a mere bureaucratic suggestion would inevitably try to cheat the system the very moment it inconvenienced him. So, I built a trap tailored exactly to his hubris. A honeypot is not a traditional firewall. It is not designed to keep an aggressive attacker out of the system. A firewall simply blocks a punch. A honeypot, however, opens the front door, cordially invites the attacker inside, offers them a comfortable seat, and then quietly locks the deadbolt behind them while meticulously recording every single breath they take. When I was setting up the standard transition protocols before my termination, I intentionally left that fragmented shadow of my biometric signature file in the archival cache. To an amateur, it looked exactly like a convenient, overlooked back door, but that shadow file was rigged with a silent, incredibly aggressive digital tripwire. The exact millisecond Julian forced the internal system to ingest that forged signature, the honeypot executed its hidden payload. It did not block the command. It allowed the heavy vault doors to open, giving Vance the sweet, intoxicating illusion of total victory, but simultaneously, working entirely in the encrypted background, the honeypot compiled a comprehensive, unalterable data packet. It recorded the exact time of the breach, the specific terminal used, the administrative credentials currently logged in, and the precise nature of the forged biometric token. It classified this act not as a simple internal corporate policy violation, but as a direct, undeniable violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343. In plain English, that is federal wire fraud and digital identity theft perpetrated directly against the United States government. The protocol bypassed the internal corporate servers completely, hijacking a dedicated hardline to fire that encrypted data packet straight into the automated investigative mainframe of the United States Marshal Service and the Department of Justice. At that exact moment, miles away from the impending corporate disaster, I was sitting comfortably in a sunlit corner of my favorite local artisanal cafe. The air smelled warmly of roasted espresso beans and fresh cinnamon. I brought a warm porcelain mug of vanilla latte to my lips, just as my heavily encrypted personal phone buzzed a single time against the wooden table. It was not a phone call. It was an automated priority email routed directly from the government compliance portal. I opened the message. The text was beautifully succinct and devastatingly clear. Fraudulent biometric bypass detected. Critical infrastructure compromised. Federal inspection team dispatched. Expected arrival time. Immediate. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The trap had not just worked, it had executed flawlessly. Back at the gleaming corporate campus, Vance Sterling walked into the grand boardroom looking exactly like a conquering emperor returning from war. The three senior representatives from the Wall Street venture capital funds were seated around the massive oak table, their digital portfolios open and ready. Vance took his power position at the head of the table, confidently dimming the overhead lights slightly as the massive ceiling-mounted projector hummed to life. He launched into his meticulously rehearsed, highly polished pitch. He spoke passionately and eloquently about explosive market growth, unprecedented profit margins, and the limitless financial potential of their new proprietary medical polymers. He utilized every popular business buzzword, waving his hands expansively as beautifully designed. Upward trending graphs depicting massive financial returns soared across the massive screen behind him. The investors were nodding slowly, clearly captivated by the grand illusion of a perfectly oiled, highly profitable corporate machine. Vance was expertly selling them the moon, and they were actively reaching for their checkbooks to fund the expedition. He was just reaching the grand climax of his presentation, confidently outlining the requested $250 million capital injection, when the federal system finally delivered its uncompromising verdict. Mid-sentence, right as the words explosive revenue left his mouth, the glowing financial chart on the projector screen violently flickered. The crisp image tore apart in a sudden, harsh wave of digital static. Vance frowned in annoyance, pausing his speech and forcefully tapping his presentation remote, assuming it was a simple wireless connectivity issue, but the remote was completely dead. The entire internal presentation network was dead. The static cleared in a fraction of a second, instantly replaced by a glaring, high-contrast white background that illuminated the dark room. In the absolute center of the massive screen, a brilliantly rendered, high-resolution image of the official seal of the Department of Justice materialized, glowing with an authoritative, intensely intimidating presence. Beneath the eagle emblem, massive, blood-red text blared across the room. Access denied. Critical federal security breach. Criminal investigation in progress. Do not power down terminals. A collective gasp echoed sharply through the quiet room. The lead investor, a notoriously ruthless woman from a top-tier New York firm, slammed her tablet down onto the heavy oak table. "Sterling, what is the exact meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the sudden silence like a freshly sharpened blade. "Is this a federal raid?" Vance stood entirely frozen at the head of the table, the remote slipping from his fingers to clatter against the wood. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a suffocating fish pulled from the water. The healthy, arrogant glow had completely vanished from his skin, leaving him looking sickly, pale, and incredibly small. "It is just a glitch," Vance stammered, his voice weak, high-pitched, and trembling uncontrollably. "A minor, insignificant software error, I assure you. Our legal compliance is absolutely perfect." But my honeypot was not finished. It was specifically designed to expose the truth with absolute, brutal transparency. The massive federal warning message shifted upward on the screen, making room for a cascading wall of bright green text. It was a raw, unedited system log file, printing out in real time for every single person in the room to read clearly. The text translated the complex digital code into undeniable, legally binding facts. Action unauthorized biometric forgery, target identity. Emery Scott, terminated employee, originating Internet Protocol, address executive suite. Chief Executive Officer, office terminal, authorizing credentials. Vance Sterling, status felony fraud confirmed, law enforcement en route. The powerful investors stared at the screen in horrified, absolute silence. The meaning was unmistakable and impossible to spin. The charismatic man standing before them, begging for hundreds of millions of dollars, had just been publicly, digitally indicted for federal identity fraud, executed from his own personal office. The polished, high-technology facade of Ethirus Biologics shattered into a million irreparable pieces right before their eyes, revealing the desperate, criminal reality underneath. At exactly 10:30 in the morning, the pristine, soundproofed reality of the Ethirus Biologics executive floor was violently and permanently shattered. The tranquil, beautifully manicured corporate courtyard outside the soaring glass lobby instantly became the staging ground for a sudden, overwhelming display of federal power. 3 massive, heavily armored black sport utility vehicles, their red and blue strobe lights painting the surrounding glass walls in a harsh, frantic rhythm, skidded to a violent halt right at the main entrance, their heavy tires screeching loudly against the pavement. The heavy doors of the vehicles swung open in perfect unison, A swarm of stern-faced federal agents and heavily armed United States Marshals poured out onto the polished concrete, their dark windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Department of Justice and the Food and Drug Administration. They did not pause at the elegant reception desk. They did not ask the terrified front desk staff for visitor security badges. They moved with the terrifying synchronized precision of a military strike unit, immediately seizing control of the entire physical space. The heavy glass doors of the lobby were forcefully propped open, and the lead agents swarmed the ground floor, their voices booming authoritatively over the soft, ambient lobby music. Federal raid. Nobody moves. Everyone, take your hands off your keyboards and step away from your desks right now, the lead agent bellowed, his voice echoing sharply up the massive open atrium of the building. Within seconds, tactical teams of agents were sprinting up the central stairwells and electronically locking down every single elevator bank. They began rapidly unrolling thick spools of bright red tamper-evident tape, stretching it aggressively across office doorways, over the server room access panels, and right across the sleek glass walls of the main research laboratories. The message was physically and legally undeniable. The entire corporate headquarters was now an active, sealed crime scene. The normal, quiet hum of a multi-million-dollar technology company was instantaneously replaced by the terrifying, chaotic sounds of a massive federal seizure. Up on the executive floor, the scene inside the grand boardroom was rapidly descending into pure, unadulterated madness. The massive projector screen was still glaring with the federal indictment log, casting a sickly, exposing light over the room. The three elite Wall Street investors, who just minutes ago had been ready to write a check for $250 million, were now scrambling wildly to salvage their own reputations and distance themselves from the radioactive disaster unfolding before them. The lead investor, the sharp, notoriously unforgiving woman from New York, did not even bother to raise her voice. Her icy silence was far more destructive than any screaming match. She calmly reached across the heavy oak table, gathered the thick stack of meticulously prepared legal term sheets and financial projections, and tore them completely in half with a sharp, violent motion. She let the ruined, worthless documents flutter to the floor right at Vance's expensive leather shoes. "This meeting is over. Do not ever attempt to contact my firm or my associates again," she said, her voice dripping with absolute, unfiltered disgust. She shoved her digital tablet into her designer briefcase, snapped the heavy brass locks shut, and marched straight out of the boardroom. The other two wealthy investors followed immediately behind her, practically running down the hallway toward the emergency stairwell. They wanted absolutely no association with a sinking corporate ship that had just exploded in broad daylight. They navigated past the federal agents swarming the floor, keeping their heads down, fleeing the building as fast as their legs could carry them. Vance was left standing completely alone in the absolute center of the grand room. The luxurious, breathable imported fabric of his tailored Italian suit was now clinging darkly to his shivering body, completely soaked through with the cold, heavy sweat of sheer panic. His meticulously styled hair was disheveled as he ran his trembling hands over his pale face, utterly unable to process the total, instantaneous collapse of his entire empire. Before he could even attempt to formulate a pathetic escape plan or call his corporate attorneys, the heavy double doors of the boardroom were shoved open with massive, undeniable force. The lead federal inspector, a tall, imposing man with closely cropped graying hair and eyes as cold as flat steel, marched into the room flanked by two heavily armed marshals. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a polite professional greeting. He immediately locked his piercing eyes with the terrified chief executive officer. "Vance Sterling, you are ordered to immediately produce the valid, federally recognized licensing credentials of the designated biological safety compliance officer currently employed and operating within this facility," the inspector demanded, his voice possessing the heavy, uncompromising weight of absolute legal authority. Vance visibly shrank under the intense, suffocating scrutiny. His charming yet charismatic facade was entirely obliterated. He stumbled backward, his hands desperately gripping the smooth edge of the conference table to keep his knees from buckling completely underneath him. "It was a sabotage," Vance stammered, his voice cracking violently into a high, desperate whine. "It was Emery Scott. She was the compliance officer. I fired her last week for gross insubordination, and she maliciously hacked into our mainframe from the outside. She planted a virus to lock the vaults and trigger these false alarms out of pure, jealous spite. She is a disgruntled, vindictive former employee. You need to go arrest her. Not me." It was the pathetic, highly predictable defense of a cornered, arrogant amateur. He genuinely believed he could simply talk his way out of a severe federal crime by shifting the blame to a subordinate who was not even in the room. He thought his sheer executive authority and expensive suit would automatically outweigh hard, unalterable digital facts. The lead inspector did not even blink. He did not show a single, microscopic ounce of sympathy for the sweating man. Instead, he calmly reached into his dark tactical jacket and produced a thick manila folder. He opened it deliberately and pulled out a single, neatly printed sheet of paper. He held it up squarely in front of Vance's pale, terrified face. "Do not attempt to lie to federal agents, Mr. Sterling. It only makes the mandatory sentencing phase significantly worse for you," the inspector said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, incredibly quiet register. "This is the official regulatory handover protocol document. It clearly and explicitly details the absolute, immediate termination of Emery Scott's federal compliance authority." The inspector pointed a thick, steady finger at the very bottom of the page, where a messy, hastily scribbled digital signature rested exactly next to a highly precise cryptographic timestamp. "This is your own personal signature, voluntarily and legally authorizing the transfer of all federal liability directly back to the executive board. You signed this document at 3:45 in the afternoon on Thursday," the inspector stated, driving each measured word like a heavy nail into a coffin. "Emery Scott did not hack your system. She left her position with complete legal and procedural perfection, by your own documented, signed admission. You have knowingly allowed this facility to house highly volatile, federally restricted biological materials without any authorized human oversight for the past 72 hours. And this morning, an internal terminal registered directly to your specific office attempted to digitally forge a federal credential to cover up that exact fact." The heavy metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoing through the silent boardroom was the definitive sound of a self-proclaimed genius realizing he was completely outmatched. The marshals did not offer Vance Sterling the dignity of a private exit. They marched him out of the executive suite, into the main glass elevator, and straight through the center of the sprawling ground floor lobby. Hundreds of employees stood frozen behind the red federal tape, their eyes wide with shock, watching their arrogant chief executive officer being escorted out of his own building in absolute disgrace. His face was completely drained of color, a sickly, chalky white. His shoulders were slumped, and his expensive Italian suit suddenly looked like a cheap, ill-fitting costume. Every single ounce of his insufferable pride had been utterly evaporated by the crushing weight of reality. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Aetheris Biologics was effectively erased from the corporate map. The Department of Justice officially announced the indefinite freezing of all company assets, intellectual property, and physical operations pending a massive criminal investigation into federal wire fraud and biological security negligence. Panic ripped through the financial sector. The company's stock, which Vance had so proudly boasted about just hours prior, went into an uncontrollable freefall. Within a single afternoon trading session, the valuation plummeted straight down to absolutely zero. The empire was not just damaged, it was completely obliterated. While the federal agents were busy boxing up the corporate servers, I had my highly paid personal attorney deliver a beautifully drafted legal notice directly to the personal residences of the remaining board of directors. The package contained a comprehensive, ironclad timeline of my termination, along with legally certified copies of the handover document Vance had blindly signed. It proved, beyond a shadow of a legal doubt, that I had executed my duties with absolute, flawless compliance. It completely insulated me from the radioactive fallout of their spectacular failure. Later that evening, I opened my personal laptop to find a frantic, desperately worded email sitting in my inbox, sent directly from the chairman of the board. It was a humiliating plea, begging me to return as an emergency consultant to help negotiate with the federal inspectors. They offered me an immediate signing bonus and a contract worth triple my original salary. I did not laugh. I did not feel the need to type out a vindictive, gloating reply. I simply moved the cursor over the message and pressed the delete key, sending their multi-million-dollar desperation straight into the digital trash bin without a second thought. Instead of responding to their pathetic pleas, I opened my professional LinkedIn network profile. I drafted a very short, incredibly polite, and deeply educational post. The title was elegantly simple: The Crucial Importance of Reading Regulatory Handover Documents. Before terminating federal compliance experts, I did not name the company, and I certainly did not name Vance. I simply outlined the theoretical legal dangers of prioritizing speed over safety in the biotechnology sector. The sheer savage subtlety of the timing was not lost on the corporate world. By the next morning, the post had accumulated millions of views, firmly establishing my reputation as an untouchable titan in the compliance industry. That evening, I sat comfortably on the plush sofa in my quiet suburban apartment. The television in the living room was tuned to the evening financial broadcast. The anchor was standing in front of a graphic of the plunging Ethers stock, detailing the historic, shocking collapse of the promising medical technology firm and the impending federal prosecution of its leadership. I smiled softly, reaching out to gently lift a crystal glass of expensive red wine. I took a slow, savoring sip. I did not stab anyone in the back. I did not hack their servers, nor did I break a single corporate or federal law. Sometimes, the most devastating, absolute revenge requires no action at all. I simply stood aside, let the system function exactly as it was designed to, and watched them enthusiastically jump right off the edge of the cliff. Thank you so much to everyone tuning in. I truly appreciate you listening to the very end of this story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our absolute best, highly exclusive true stories that are simply too intense to be published publicly on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code right here on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.